Okay. Yeah, we're all here now. Okay,
Cool.
anyway. All right, Matthew, I'm so glad that you joined me again so that we can really pick up on this conversation of validation, like what it like our desire as artists to feel validated in what we're doing. And you when we were just hopping on the call, you really brought up a really great point of how art is just so undervalued. Like,
Mhm.
why do you think that as we try to enter into creativity, because really God is creative, right? And we're his kids. And we don't question why we have brown eyes or blue eyes. And we don't question why we have brown hair or black hair or whatever. But we question our desire to be creative, and our father is creative. So like, what are some of the reasons you think we feel, you know, undervalued, or like we shouldn't enter into creativity?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. I think one of the things that comes to mind for me is that, um, we're always looking for ways to, and things that can kinda we can quantify, that we can
Measurable.
measure, that are measurable, which is another way maybe of saying things that we can, like, control and manage.
Uh,
And if we can control it and manage it, then it makes us feel like we're in control, and if we're
mhm,
in control, it makes us feel like we're safe and we're gonna have what we need. But there's
mm,
something weird about art that is not, you can't quite do that with art. It's not something you can get all the way around or control or pin it down. In that sense, art is more like relationship than it is like
mhm.
mechanism or a
Yeah,
machine. And I think in some ways that's kind of threatening.
it is. It reminds me, now I'm not gonna say the title of it, and I think anybody just listening will understand. It reminds me of when a certain novel came out and it got picked up to be a book and all these different things. Even within the church, even though the book had like this is an example for you if you don't know. They're like, I've seen in the church where people have tried to use creativity to express something holy. And the thing about creativity is you're always going to take a risk, because there's always a risk it's misunderstood. And
Sure. Yeah.
you can't make somebody understand your art. You can't make somebody resonate with your art. So there's that, like, do I take a risk and try to share this important and valuable, like, because I saw people in the church like just cut it down, like just
Mhm.
shut it down before they even like looked at it. Like we heard a lot of people say, like, leaders, high leaders say that, oh, condemn this book because it's talking about this or it did this a certain way. But then I took a step back and I wanted to see for myself what was inside, and like, is it true? Is that how it's being portrayed? And you can take this example really with anything. I feel like, of course, there's always, solid theology. And I think there's no threat really if you are reading your Bible. If people are reading their Bible and they're trying to connect to God. Um, so I looked at this, piece of art, and I actually saw a lot of good things in it. And there's just, what the point I'm trying to make is that it doesn't feel safe at all to make art, because especially in our social media world, even spiritually in some circles, there's such a, you can do this but you can't do that. You can express like this about God, but you can't express like that. Or even certain art mediums that are condemned. And I think that, like you said, a lot of it comes down to control, like wanting to feel like you're in control. And I think, like, that's just not the way adventure, relationship really works. Okay,
Mhm.
what are your thoughts on that? I don't know.
Yeah, well, if if you want to feel really safe, then you do algebra maybe, uh,
I
because
hope you got
you
it.
can make everything kind of equal out like you want. But in
Yeah.
relationships, in relationships, you're always like the thing that makes relationships work is vulnerability
Yes.
and availability and kind of and Tolkien talked about writing Lord of the Rings, and he said, when I put this thing out in the world, he said, I'm opening my heart to be shot at. And
Mm,
he said, like, I have to get ready for people to say, what is this junk about hobbits and elves? And this is stupid. Which,
yeah.
of course, tons of people have said that. And he knew that he had to get ready for that. It was a vulnerable thing to do. And art is the kind of thing that is more like entering into a relationship with another person and saying, here's my heart, here's the things I care about, and I'm trying to make something out of this, and I can't control what you're gonna think about it or feel about it. Um, and how am I gonna navigate all of that? Am I gonna get really mad when people don't like it? Am I gonna close off and stop making stuff? Am I gonna retreat? There's so many different probably things, but ultimately, I think art making is vulnerable,
Yeah.
and and it's and if you enter into it wanting to use art to kind of control people, that's called propaganda, right? Propaganda
Mm,
is when you make art in order to control other people.
mhm.
Or and it so we or sentimentalism is even that. If I
Yeah.
use art to make people feel the things that I want them to feel so that I can benefit from that somehow, that's
Yeah.
so there are a
And
lot of I think a lot of the dangers of art are also in a lot of ways the same dangers of bad relationship.
yes. Oh my gosh, that's so good. And I love what you said about being vulnerable, like being ready to expect like the misunderstandings and possibly even the rejection. And so that leads me to the first question I really had. Like thinking about your own experience, what do you think artists should expect? We're talking maybe to the person who's just starting something, or maybe they're starting something new, pivoting into something new, trying something new. What do you, or maybe it's the seasoned artist that's going to launch something a little different than they have before. Like, what do you, what would you say they should expect from others when they tell other people about this art that they're making?
Well, I think it is normal to expect that it may not make sense. Um, one of the difficult things about being a person versus being a machine is like part of what we're always trying to do is make something, some invisible thing inside of us that only we know about, and like bring it out and then hand it to you. I'm trying to make what's going on inside of me known to
Mm,
someone other than myself.
yeah.
And that's really hard to do. It's very likely that that other person will be like, I don't what? Or you won't, or you'll say like I'm trying to do right now. I'm
Yeah,
trying to
yeah,
say
yeah, yeah. No, I
here's
totally
what
get
I'm
it.
trying to say, and then you'll think, okay, that didn't work. Maybe let me say that a different way. Oh, that didn't work either. Let me try that again.
Maybe they should expect trial and error.
Yeah,
That's
that's a great point.
trial
Yeah.
and error, you
Yeah,
know?
you wanna expect and don't be too hard on yourself when you don't get it right the first time. You
Yeah,
may have to try some different versions of it, like drafts. You may have to try
yeah.
some multiple drafts, you know. So I think that's one thing.
I
Also,
think
well, go ahead.
I'm sorry. Oh, I think this is a perfect moment too to inject this quote I wanted to share with you. Man, I had never thought about this before, and I think this is gonna be something that too that can segue into a next question about how can we really um draw our validation from God and from relationship with God. All right. So
Mhm.
like, but here's a very peculiar point to ponder. Now this is a quote from my friend Christina Patterson. She teaches the Bible, and she was speaking the context here. She's speaking on why can't you finish something you start, or why is it so hard to try something new? And so here's her quote. You think to yourself, I just want to eat healthy, start a business, go on more dates with my husband. But what you're actually doing is potentially breaking generational cycles of disease, poverty in broken homes. You're not just making plans, you're taking territory. And with that, oh, you better believe comes some opposition, end quote. And I'll leave the link in the description to this video where I took that quote. But what do you think about like art as actually spiritual warfare?
Yeah. Well,
In terms of like what we should expect when we're trying to do our art, you know?
yeah. Well, one of the ways that I feel like I've come across that most is just feeling like an idiot.
Yes.
Just feeling like I care about this, but I feel stupid for caring about this. I feel like I shouldn't care about this, like it's not valuable, and I'm
Mm,
looking around me and everybody is climbing all these other ladders, and I don't really care about those ladders, but everybody says those things are important, and I don't know, it's like, um and so I feel like one of the very subtle ways, at least, that works for me is just having to say, "Okay, I've got a lot of voices in my head saying this is so dumb,
mm,
but I think I think this does matter, and I'm gonna just do it anyway, even though I don't f it's doesn't feel I don't feel like it." Um, and, um, again, if it's true that art is in some sense a way of naming the preciousness of relationship and people, then it makes sense that that's going to get opposition. That we're gonna that that evil uh, beings are going to want to draw us away from that. Also, I think about how abuse works,
mm,
and like the way that abuse works is you want to get that person off by themselves away from their friends,
mm,
right? And you so that they don't have anything to compare the lies to. That makes
mm.
sense. You can mess with somebody's head if you get them isolated,
Yeah.
and you can just be telling them stuff, and they're like, "Well, I guess that's true. I don't know." And so
It's
one of the
kinda weird, like, you can do that with social media too, like,
things,
with the way the feeds are made, like, you can be essentially in this weird echo chamber that's not real, it's very manufactured. You can,
mhm,
like, uh you can like, for example, I think one way is that, like, believers could be on media and thinking, "Okay, people feel this way about the family, or this way about kids, or this way about, truth." But actually, it couldn't be you actually get outside and you actually engage with people and things are different. But yeah,
mhm.
there's such a way. Yeah, I hear exactly what you're saying, with that.
So one of the things that art making in some sense calls for, especially as a Christian, understanding that God is Trinity, and you've got things like wherever there two or more are gathered.
Mhm.
And I was just reading in a commentary last night. He talks about in the Gospel of John how what you always see demonstrated is that you've got learners or disciples, people who are learning from Jesus, but there's always other learners around. They're never learning all by themselves. They're
Mm,
learning with other people. And art ultimately is the kind of thing where um, you're always wanting connection. You're always saying, "I want somebody to hear this song or read this book
yeah.
I made," or here's this thing I'm interested in, and I wanna talk about it with somebody."
Yes. It's
And
like
so
your joy isn't consummated until you
right,
tell somebody or invite somebody else in. It's like that C.S. Lewis quote. We have to let somebody else know for that joy to be complete.
exactly. I love that phrase, "Make my joy complete." Um, yeah, by entering into this same thing that is giving me joy, and so that we can have joy together about it. And so I think art has that natural quality to it of it wants to generate a relationship, and it wants to value something that is not primarily utilitarian. or practical.
Yeah, practical or whatever.
In other words, like, the reason I want to connect with you over this art is something that may not make any money, may not make any sense, may not have any sort of economic practical outcome. It's purely just something like because it's good, because I like to be with you, because I want, and those are the things that actually make us human,
Yeah.
you know. And so I feel like really art has this natural drive towards reinforcing personhood and
Mm,
humanity and connection and attachment. And that is something that the enemy does not want to encourage.
yeah.
So anytime the enemy can turn the pursuit of making art into propaganda or sentimentalism or
Yeah.
something that I can use to get something, um, then, you know, and you have you've done a lot of work with things like pornography, and you can think in terms of, okay, what is happening there? Well, there's obviously something that is created by God, gifted by God, this
Mhm.
amazing beauty and connection that's available there, but it's been turned into utility. It's
Yeah.
been turned into like, now I see this person as something I can use
Mm.
and separate from their like intrinsic personhood.
Mhm.
We can do that with art too. Like, we can do that with anything in the world, actually.
Yeah, yeah. It's so
Um,
crazy, like how, like you said, art is so, um, for lack of better words, it's so fluid with like you said, like relationships and like really what's going on behind the scenes of our heart.
mhm.
That's why like when people say, when people say, I'm gonna finish my thought. When people say like, "Oh, I'm listening to a song, but I'm not really listening to the words. I'm just listening to the beat." I'm like, "No, there's something going on spiritually there, relationally, how you relate to others there because I can't relate to you if you're singing this song about objectifying a woman or doing this or doing that, or like how you don't care about, your husband now, you're going to do whatever you want to do, or
Yeah.
you get what I'm saying, whatever those negative distracting messages are, because you really can't divorce the heart of the art from the actual art itself, like with the songs or with the what you're watching, so it's so important to be, I guess, just mindful of that. And so that's why
Mhm.
um art is so powerful, because it has that ability to, like, your heart is like a castle and it can really sneak behind those walls very cleverly and deliver these different messages to it. And yeah, that's yeah, go ahead.
Well, yeah, like Lewis talks about in Abolition of Man, how the purpose of education is to train your affections so
Yes.
that so that you naturally feel good about things that actually are good, and you feel bad about things that actually are bad. And that you begin to desire things that you ought to desire, and you begin to want to get away from things that you ought to want to get away from, you know. And he says, but I think music, even instrumental, even the non-verbal part of music is also training our affections, because we live
Mhm,
in bodies, and music is actually, it doesn't seem like it because you can't see it or, in a sense, touch it, but
mhm.
music is actually a physical phenomenon.
Hmm.
It is a thing that you make with your body, you make with an instrument that is a physical piece of wood and metal,
Yeah,
and the way that you receive music is by your body actually
yeah.
vibrating and responding to it. So we don't often think of music as a physical thing, but it is actually a physical reality that you receive in your body and that changes the way you feel. It's sensory. And so I think if you have violent music, for instance,
Mhm.
uh, even if it's just instrumental music,
Yeah.
that's gonna like physically affect you and it's gonna
Mhm.
also shape the kinds of things that it's gonna shape your affections.
Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
for sure. And just to give the audience a little context, if you guys aren't familiar with my background, I don't expect you to be. When he was mentioning earlier about like the my work with like pornography things, I actually have a ministry online called Purpose and Purity. It's actually like titaniapage.com. So a lot of my testimony has been like I wrote a book dealing with how do women or just people in the church, if you just need the message, but how do women who struggle with those things bring that to God and really like turn from a lifestyle of habitual sin in that area to a lifestyle of yielding? And a lot of that is relationship and what we're talking about.
yeah.
And one of the steps in my book actually is called Finding Purpose and Purity. And for me, a lot of that was art and serving in the church. And so, yeah, getting back to like the anxieties around our art and
Mhm.
pursuing that, like what has been like I remember before we were talking about a psalm you drew some inspiration or some comfort from, like when you feel like, because sometimes there are voices even inside the church that say, listen, yeah, let's do a worship song or whatever, but that art you're doing over there, that's not important. Like we need to get
Mhm.
out the streets and we just need to be sharing the gospel. And yes, we do, but there's more than one way to share the gospel. But
Mhm.
yes, we do need to share the explicit verbal message, or however whoever our listener is, however get the message to
Mhm.
them. But what do you do with these messages that tell us that our creativity really isn't important? It's more about bringing or being productive, for spiritually or in the church. Like, what has that looked like from you? Like, what inspiration from God's word and just your relationship have you drawn to see the fruit of being who God created you be in exercising your creativity? What does that look like for you?
Yeah, I can't remember who said this, but or maybe I've seen it in multiple places, but the idea that Jesus is so inexhaustibly beautiful and, rich that in order for his church to communicate him, like, it takes billions of people, like, to communicate this one person, and it takes every little variation of person to be able to communicate some other aspect that someone else doesn't. So everybody brings to the table some little piece of that image and makes it available within the world. Um, and what that means is that everybody can there might be sort of guidelines and patterns that repeat, but for each individual person, there's going to be some very peculiar way that you make the treasure of Jesus's presence available that only you do, and so you might find your own style of doing that.
Mm.
Um, and or your own particular gift that's not like somebody else's gift. And so I think in our Western, uh, kind of post-industrial,
Mm.
uh, culture, we want, we want to just, like, run everything through, this machine that just stamps, like, boom,
Yes.
this is what Christian looks like we stamp this little mold and everything. And actually what Paul says is don't be conformed, right?
Mm. Oh, that's so good. Yes, don't be conformed. Yeah, to the
But
image.
and I remember a pastor I had one time saying that, the word there is schema, I think, and schema means, to press something into a mold.
Mm.
And, and so you can imagine, like, this factory machine that's just, like, spitting that out, just
Yeah.
and he says, "Well, instead of doing that, you just bring yourself and offer yourself as a living sacrifice with personality and interests and gifts, and
Mm.
instead of being smushed into a pigeonhole or a little mold and spit out the other side that looks just like every other little mold, like,
Yeah.
you like let God and the community God has situated you within, um, through that matrix of relationships, let something really beautiful and unique be birthed. And
Mm.
in some sense, like don't get ahead of yourself and say, uh, I'm going to look just like this, or I'm going to look just like that. Like it's a process of trusting God, saying, I don't know exactly where this is going to go, what you
Yeah.
long for that creative ride,
Ah, that's so wonderful. That was a really good point. And I feel like this is what the church needs, because when we have eyes to see and appreciate the variety and the diversity of the church. And I'm not just talking about race, I'm talking about personalities, I'm talking about, backgrounds. Like when we can start to see and appreciate the differences of something, but also have the eyes to see what's foundationally still true. And like,
Mhm.
let's just, for example, just looking at other believers that I know they love the Lord, but they might not have the same convictions as me or the same passions as me. They might have a personality that absolutely gets on my nerves, but like they are still my brother and sister. They're still from the same litter, so to speak.
Yeah.
They're children of God, and having an eyes to appreciate and welcome those differences. That's what makes us more compassionate and more gentle, like to be able to speak truth and love to those outside the church. Because when we have an attitude that everybody has to look like this flavor of Christian, I'm not saying, that's assuming everybody is holding to, the God's word, the truth of
Sure.
God's word in every area. But still they're different. There are cowboy churches out there for good. I want to go to one. There's a cowboy church. There's a cowboy church. There's the quote unquote black church. There's a white church. There's a Spanish speaking churches, even just here in
Yeah.
Memphis. And if we can't love and appreciate differences in people,
Yeah.
especially like that's gonna show up in art, I think, when how we perceive and view art. We'll see, oh, it's different immediately. Let's shut it down. And I think that what, like you said, just like what you were saying, like what God wants us to strive for is being able to let go of control, because I think wanting everything to look the same and be the same and not having any risk taken, right,
Mhm.
is our desire to control things. And I think art is kind of like that part of us, or that part of God that says, hey, listen, this is life. It's very practical, it's very real, but all of it is still an adventure. Like I
Mhm.
want you to take risk and be yourself, and like I want you to tell truth in new beautiful ways, through
Mhm.
stories, through paintings, drawings, and all these, like through digital art, all these different things, through dance. Like, but anyways,
Yeah.
yeah, that's so incredible.
Well, yeah, there's a guy named Jeremy Begbie, and he's a musician theologian, and he talks a lot about using sort of like looking at music and seeing how you can see patterns of reality. And one of the things he talks about is, I mean, I come from a tradition musically where I started out on kind of classic rock, which is very blues based. And in that genre, if you're a guitarist, at least, there's a lot of your main thing is like you want to learn how to play a guitar solo like Jimi Hendrix. You want to learn how to like, um, and so there's this idea of improvisation where, and I get really excited about that. Like I love to just get a chord progression looped and then just like jam for an hour.
Yeah.
And so this idea of improv, but improv does not mean uh, chaos or randomness. Like what makes improvisation possible is that you are understanding yourself to be working and playing within a structure, within a tradition.
Mm.
And so, like, if you're a jazz musician, like jazz musicians are nuts because they have such a deep understanding of like um, of their tradition, of the way that music works, and then they can go within that, and they can go in all these new interesting directions. They can try things, and then they can do that not only by themselves, but like with 3 or 4 other people. And they all can like improvise together and like play off of each other and respond and like listen to what this guy's playing, and then they can play this little. And so like, I think
Yeah.
that's such a cool example of like, yeah, that's the kind of world we live in, actually. And that's what God has set up. God has made a world where you can find out the quote unquote tradition. You can look at it and say like, okay, there are patterns, they're complex, but they're like regularities that I can pick up on and I can enter into, and then I can improvise with that. And I've heard a lot of theologians talk about doing that with the gospel. Like, you don't ignore the gospel, you get to know the gospel so well that you know all the themes and all the scales and all the chord progressions and all the standards, and then you can like riff on it. You can just
Yes.
use this. And then when you do that, if you have a group of people that knows the gospel so well that they can play together and improvise and
Really?
generate surprising things that you would never think of, but
Wow.
they're obviously coming from this very stable foundation. Like,
Yes.
jazz is extremely stable. Blues is extremely stable. But then out of that stability comes all this innovation and surprise.
Man, that's so good.
Yeah.
Man, we can talk about this all day, but we literally can't because we gotta move on.
I love it. Yeah, it is exciting to me.
Man, this was so cool. Like, thank you so much for this incredible conversation. And while the actual interview itself, I'm pretty sure I'm gonna weave in some more stuff in the actual editing. But
Mhm.
man, I hope as you were listening to this, what you were really doing was really engaging with your heart and where you are with your insecurities around your art or creating, and your anxieties around that. I hope that this conversation opened your eyes to some things that you might want to say, like, man, maybe I am really seeking to have control over something, when really I just need to be trusting that if I bring my fish and loaves, that
Mm.
what the purpose, like the whether it's doing the work in me, because there's actual work happening when you seek to, like you said in the beginning, bring this invisible thing out of you and try to formulate it into something that's digestible to somebody else. There's a lot of work inside of yourself that happens to learn how to articulate that, whether it's through your art or whatever art form you're using. I hope that whether that's the work your art is doing right now, or your art is doing that in serving others, I pray that like this conversation was something that really helped you think about that desire for validation. Because I think, yeah, man, like I don't want to keep dragging it on, but I hope that really made you think about, where is this desire for validation coming from? Is it a good desire? Is it something that's healthy? Did you have any final thought too before we end?
Yeah. One thing is, the way humans are made and the way the world is made is that you can't generate life from within yourself. I mean, you know this every day because you have to eat food to stay alive.
Yeah.
So life comes from outside of you in. And you mentioned, and so the whole pattern of this is that the word becomes flesh and dwells among us. And then he offers himself as food from heaven, he's manna from heaven. So we take the life of Christ into us, and that's what keeps us alive. So in other words, don't feel bad about needing validation,
Mm.
because you do actually need someone else to come alongside you. You can't keep a hold of reality all by yourself, and you shouldn't expect yourself to be able to do that. That's why that abuse paradigm works so well, is to get somebody off by themselves, because without the help of the other people around them to help them see what's real, they will lose track of reality. And
Mm.
the other thing I would say is that I have this idea of authority has really helped me. And who are the voices that you give authority in your life? And as an artist, I need, if I need help understanding where my art is or what my gifts are, I don't take my short story to the math teacher. Not
Yeah.
right, not because there's anything wrong with math, but because the math teacher has authority in math. He doesn't have authority in short story writing or fiction or fantasy. Um, I want to be sure and take my pearls to the people who have authority in that arena. And
Yeah.
then, because people are going to tell you things you don't want to hear, and if they are a person of authority in that area, then you need to listen.
Mm,
Even if it's unpleasant, you need to actually listen or you'll never get any better. But if somebody who does not have authority in that area tells you something bad, you can take it with a grain of salt and say, maybe I'll listen to that, maybe not. Is it a good point? Is it not a good point? Because I've had people tell me things that were really, really painful and miserable to hear, but I
mm,
recognize, like, this guy is a top-notch Nashville producer. He knows what he's talking about. I don't like what he said, but I need to listen to it, or I
yeah.
won't. And then I've had people who don't really like art that much anyway, and they told me something I didn't want to hear, and I said, I don't need to get too hung up on that because they don't. This isn't their area of interest or authority anyway. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that's perfect, sis. I'm glad you added that. Now I'm like, oh my gosh, I should ask you more about that. I should poke that bear some more. But
That's been helpful to me to kind of clear some things up as far as, like,
yeah,
which things do I need to give weight to?
ooh,
Which
that's
voices
good.
do I need to give weight to? Because I do need validation and accompaniment and help and encouragement. I desperately need that.
Yeah,
But I
no, that's so
also, some
good.
voices are not as helpful as others or
So
don't have
how
as
have you been so how have you been finding that healthy group to help you, what does that look like for you? Has it looked like, and my daughter just busting in
Hey,
with her rice. Say hi. Hi.
good morning.
You're full? Okay, good. All right, I love you.
I'll get some of that.
Go the other way. Anyways, this is real life, guys. Um, how have you gathered a healthy authority or healthy group around you to speak into you and your art? And has that looked like just friends, or has that looked like investing in like a musician camp, or hours with somebody? What does that look like for you?
Mm. Well, a couple of things. One part of it is just the Lord has provided. I sort of prayed for that, and the Lord, in His way, just wove together different connections and friendships. And there are people like Lancia Smith or Malcolm Guite, or through the Cultivating Project or the C.S. Lewis Foundation or Rabbit Room, like a lot, or Anselm Society out in Colorado, like a lot of these different people that God has slowly over a decade or more put in my life, or even you
No.
know, to like reinforce that calling or that gift or those desires. And so part of that is like the Lord has just done that as I've prayed for it and tried to keep an eye out for what He's up to. And then the other was to be proactive and seek out communities that seem to be doing the things that I was interested in. So like going to Hutchmoot with the Rabbit Room in Nashville, like going to those conferences, and in which is, can be an investment. It's a time investment, a money investment. Going to C.S. Lewis's conference, Oxbridge. I didn't have enough money to do that, so I applied to be like a volunteer and be on their work staff, and I got a scholarship. Or Anselm Society and Imagination. So getting involved in things where the kinds of things you care about are happening and the kinds of people that care about the things you care about are gathering.
Mm.
Like if you don't have that around you automatically, which you probably don't, like going and finding those things, or what's a lot harder is creating them yourself. You're doing that with lamp burners, like, which is blows my mind, like that you're lamp burners, that you're like putting a flag in the ground, like making that happen where you are.
Thanks, man.
That's really incredible. But I would be interested in, like, how did you get this sort of get your feet under you enough to even have the motivation to do what you're doing? Like, how did that happen for you?
Well, it really came out of a place of disappointment, like how can I say it? Trusting God through a big disappointment. And so a lot of people know that, like, I tell a lot of people my story that we were trying to be missionaries, and we like really
Mm,
believe God was leading us to push toward that. And it's our story is not finished yet. It's possibility we might still do those things, but for this season,
mhm.
a lot of it has been re wrapping my head around ministry doesn't always just look like this. And we're in such a crazy time where things are changing, and like I feel like something more tangible, like with people, needs to happen to like let other people experience who God is where they are. And so I have, yeah, been processing that disappointment of not being able with my family after, like, I'm talking about a nearly a decade. Like, we've tried time after time. Like, first time I was gonna be a teacher in Japan, and then COVID hit, and then
Yeah,
Japan closed for 4 years. No visitors, no nothing. They
yeah,
closed the whole country. And it felt like you love somebody that wasn't ready to love you back, and that was really disappointing. And yeah,
mm,
so anyways, this year was like kind of like our like, okay, we're gonna try one more thing, and if God closes this door, we're just gonna let it go and be open to what God is doing. And so that's how lamp burners was burnt. I felt through that experience that God was saying, like, I need you to not live for the next season. I need you to learn how to live right here, and then be a part of something beautiful happen. Don't complain about where you live. Don't complain about the crime, or because Memphis doesn't have the best reputation. And
sure.
I've lived in other beautiful, wonderful places, and I've wanted to leave. And so it's kind of like picking up the gauntlet on the floor, like the gauntlet was thrown, like bam, you're not going anywhere. So what are you gonna do, Nia? Like, are you gonna complain, or are you gonna do something else? Are you gonna try to make something beautiful? And this is the first time in my life, because I'm a control freak, that I've ever done anything and I don't have a plan for it. I
Oh,
don't.
yeah.
I'm
Well,
just doing it.
two things jump out about that to me is, like, uh, not being a victim. I really struggle with complaining and being like, "Oh, I can't do this because somebody else didn't do what they were supposed to do," and it's like and, like and sort of feeling like the Lord is like, "Would you get on with it?" And, like, so that's one thing it's hard to get over, and then the other thing is, um, I feel like the Lord is way more excited about doing new things and interesting things than I am, and so, like, I always wanna do something I already know how to do.
Yeah.
The Lord is like, "No, I'd like for you to learn how to be a beginner all over again and come into some area and learn something you don't know how to do," and I'm like, "Yeah, but I already had this thing figured out." And I was
Yes.
like, "Yeah, yeah, don't worry about that. Let's do something this'll be exciting." I feel like the Lord is, like, kinda giddy and excited to, like, try something interesting, and, I'm like, "Can we just do something I already feel like I've got it figured out, and I know how it works, and I got" I don't
Yeah.
have to learn some new thing, and I feel like the Lord is always excited to learn new things and teach us things, and,
Yeah, man,
um,
that's good.
so I
One
guess
thing that pops up in my head, and thanks for asking me that. I think a lot of times when I hop on interviews, I'm always very cautious um, to be respectful. And I think because I have been good at things in my life, I know I have a tendency to like approach topics and or try to structure things as if like structure things the way a marketing expert would. But
Okay.
like this conversation has more value to it, obviously, than like doing things the quote unquote way they should be done. So I just appreciate your humility and like just even asking me like to bring my experience with that in it, because it does, my experience does matter. And so I think that I
Mhm.
added a lot of, something wonderful to the conversation. But since we're almost an hour into this, we might as well like make it like an hour. So what so one of the things I know I have heard, I was speaking with someone, another woman who is, we're not like, when I look at your guitarmanship, I'm like, wow, this guy is incredible. And for me, like, I have a tendency to feel like I have to like conform to like, okay, before I start having shows, I need to be really good at playing guitar. And I know to some extent, yeah, you do need to respect your craft, but at the same time, if you don't ever start doing it, like, will you ever really do it? If
Mhm.
you just start, even though you're not quote unquote ready. I'm not saying that like with a song or something, right? I'm not gonna just go sing some unpolished song that I haven't worked with and like made sure like the message is tight, because I don't want to be giving somebody something, a gift that I haven't really prepared for them. And
Mhm.
so, but what do you say? Because we could really use that for anything like, oh, I'm an artist, but I don't have the best paint setup, or
Mhm.
I'm a videographer, but I don't have the best camera. Like what did that look like for you? Like, what would you say to somebody who feels like they haven't gotten that stamp of approval yet because they don't
Mhm.
look a certain way or they're not a certain place?
Gosh, yeah, that's a really interesting discussion because I feel like there are a lot of when we look out and we see all these polished professional things, and that can create a lot of pressure and make it hard to feel like, well, what's even the point? But I do feel like the way that you get better at something is not by waiting till you're better to start trying. Like you have to be like really bad at something for a
Yeah.
long time. Yeah, but you have to just care about it. You have to care about the thing that you're doing more in some sense than you care about uh, whether you measure up. Like you have to just love something. I
Mhm.
mean, and I think one of the best things you can do as an art maker is to just start making art. You just got to start doing it. And there's this quote that I go back to again from G.K. Chesterton, and he said, "Anything worth doing is worth doing badly." Like,
Mm.
hey, do it, be really bad at it, but at least start doing it, and
Yeah.
you'll get better. You need to just keep making stuff and keep making stuff. And and again, get people around you. Be okay to be a beginner. Get people around you of authority who can encourage you, who can validate you, who can say, keep going. There's some potential here. Like you're not there yet, but do
Mhm.
another draft, do another draft. But and it is vulnerable. And you can't necessarily control everything or everyone's responses.
Ooh, I
But
have a good question. I want to ask you.
goodness, don't let that keep you from starting.
I don't want. I didn't mean to interrupt. I just feel
Yeah.
like forget to ask you this because my brain is like. Psh. But anyways, how do you? Because this is something I saw that you do at Hutch Move that I thought, wow, it takes incredible humility and groundedness and love to, when you are good at something, give encouragement and feedback. How have you like, and I know that I'm pretty sure like you're a human being, so I'm sure there's been times where you feel like you fumbled the ball here. But how do you, when you are good at your craft and realistically there's a lot of work that you have to put into this to become, you know, to master your craft, right? How do you protect yourself from being somebody who is cutting others down or making them feel less than, like, instead of building them up? Because there's so many opportunities and so many, even little slick ways we can like cut somebody down or be throwing shade. How do you protect yourself from that? Because that's one of the things I really admired about you when I met you at Hutchmoot.
Well, part of it is like, hey, remember how much mercy you've been shown? Like, and you're gonna go out there and stomp on somebody else, so that's part of it, is just remembering, man, the Lord has been so unreasonably good to me. And the other thing is realizing, like, there's plenty of pie to go around. Like, I don't have to, like, defend my pie.
Yeah.
And so, like, your talent or your gifts are not a threat to me. Like, God is a God of abundant life. He's not gonna run out of love or gifts or goodness. And so, like, I don't have to hoard that as if I'm gonna run out, or if this somehow, like, if you get a little bit of the pie, I'm not gonna have as much. So,
Yeah.
like, I don't have to look at a room full of people and feel like their talent is somehow a threat to me, you know? And
Yeah.
that really frees me up to just enjoy their talent, whatever it is,
Good.
like, and say, like, "Oh, that's awesome. Look what the abundance of God has poured out on you, and the abundance of God has poured out on you." And so, like, we don't have to feel threatened by each other, or we're not actually competing.
That's so good. All right, I think this will be my last question because
Sure.
oh my God, like I said, we can talk about this all day. And
Yeah,
I'm
it's so fun to talk about.
editing these things. I love just having this organic like conversation, even just letting my kid interrupt because I feel like all of this like really sets people free to just hey, we're all just out here, um,
Yeah.
living and doing the best we can and just trying to be obedient to God. The last question I would have is like, how do you protect yourself from distraction? And I don't just mean distraction like not creating or distraction like being envious or like, but how do you like protect your message? Like I feel like of course there's room in our creativity to express things in new ways. We can be like, for example, with the Wing Feather Saga books, right? They're not like on the surface level explicitly the gospel, but when
Mhm.
you get down to the heart of the story, and I don't know if you've even read those yet, I'm just giving an example, but
Sure.
the heart of the message is the gospel. And
Mhm.
so how do you protect yourself from making like from the desire to be validated outside of that relationship with God? So like the only reason why I could see myself, like, for example, to give a quick example, like, oh, this person is having so much success from selling this product or offering this service. So I want to offer this service. Or even in my design business, I got to do some conferences this year. I
Mhm.
love doing conferences. I get to meet people. I get to go travel. It feels so glamorous. But I'm a designer. Like, why am I trying to add a speaking page to my design website? I'm like totally getting distracted from what I'm actually supposed
Oh,
to be doing. So, how do you protect yourself from
mhm.
that desire for outside validation?
Man, that's a great question. 'Cause, I mean, it never stops kinda pulling at you.
Mm,
Uh, one of the things I try to pay attention to is, it's like, remember your first love.
mm.
And sometimes I look up and I'm like, "Wait a minute, I haven't I haven't been doing the thing that I actually care about for, like, 6 months or whatever," or, like, this other thing is draining all the life out of me, and I feel like it's so important, and it's like, "Well, maybe it's not," and realizing, like, "Okay, that I wanted that for some other weird reason," you know?
Mm.
And, that's I don't know that ever really totally goes away. I think
Oh,
it's like a thing where you're constantly recalibrating, you're constantly, like,
yes.
having to, like, there's that phrase in scripture that says, "Don't turn to the right or the left."
Yeah.
It's like you can be walking down the road and you're like eyes straight ahead and you're like, what's that? You know?
Yeah. Yeah.
and like of course that's gonna happen. Like you're gonna fall off in the ditch. You're gonna get, like squirrel, and you're gonna go over there. And Henry Nouwen says, anytime you fall off in the ditch, do not waste any time hesitating to come back. Like, come back immediately.
Yeah.
And the Lord is glad to have you. And so, and that's, I think that's also a process where we do need other people's help. We need people that love us and who have that sense of authority in our lives because they understand the gift that we've been given. And they're helping us negotiate that, helping us if somebody asks me to come do something and they'll say like, yeah, that's not really what you do. And there's another thing that Andy Gullahorn said one time. He said, the hardest thing in the world is to find out what you don't do.
Ooh.
And he said, that's a big part of the process of being an artist is that partly you're trying a lot of things and then over time things are whittled down, but then you have to keep reminding yourself like, well, I could go on this cooking show, but I'm not really a cook. I'm actually a songwriter, so I need to stay in this lane,
Mm-hmm. So
And
in such a way, we can be grateful for those moments where we veer off course because they help us to understand. Oh, okay. So these help us recognize those future points.
mhm.
Where, oh, I'm actually getting off right here. I need to stay. Let me reroute. That's
Yeah.
really good.
Another thing that helps me think about this sort of visually is I think about there might be different seasons for different things,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't have to do everything all the time.
Yeah.
But if I could trace and sort of identify what is the core gift that God has given me, and think of that as like this little bulb underground that's going to grow up into a rose bush. But the root ball or the bulb underground, that's like the core thing that God has made me to do. And then that may sprout up into a shrub that has multiple buds on it. And so like for me, the thing underground is something like hospitality.
Mm-hmm.
And then that shows up in songs, meals, visits, house concerts, podcasts.
Mm-hmm.
But if it goes back underground to the bulb, it's all coming from the same thing. Now, there might be a season where I need to prune podcasts, for instance, so that house concerts and songwriting have more juice.
Yeah.
They're getting more juice.
A little bit more juice.
To grow and to like that's how pruning works. If you grow roses,
Yeah.
Marcia taught me this. And she said, a rose bush will produce way more buds than it can actually sustain. And so you have to cut some of them off
Mm.
so that some of them, just a few, can get the nutrients that they need to do their thing. And like, I think our calling is like that. There's always more. We could always be doing something else, but we have to make decisions. Like, what's that core thing? What do I want? Maybe
Mhm.
maybe in some season you just cut the whole bush down. You're like, okay, I need to just take a year off.
Yeah, yeah, and that's viable. That's a viable option. Yeah,
Yeah.
because we need that sometimes.
Maybe just fried, you need some rest.
Yeah, that's so good. Would you just say a prayer for our creatives and artists and resonators listening? Just praying over our desire for validation to find that healthy, like
Mhm.
validation in our relationship with God, that community, and then like even to be having the humility to be taught by those situations where we find ourselves seeking that outside validation. But just pray for our listeners as
Yeah.
we end our conversation today.
Yeah, sure. Jesus, you are that invisible thing God wanted to say that he made it into flesh in the world so that we could dwell with and receive what was on your mind and in your heart, Lord. So Jesus, thank you for coming to be with us. And what we want more than anything, Lord, is to be with you where you are. And we want to be with you, doing with you what you're doing. And you're the one who made the whole world.
Yes.
So, Lord, we want to be sub-creators with you. We want to be participating in the beautiful, surprising, vulnerable things that you're doing. And we want the things that you've given us, the gifts and the interests and the passions and the materials even of the world that you've put in front of us. God, we want to lift all that up to you and say, teach us how to do this.
Yes.
And encourage us, Lord, and put people around us that can help us understand and our gifts and stay on track. And Lord, most of all, we want to turn our faces toward your face and see you smiling at us, knowing that you're calling us toward yourself, and that whatever we do or whatever we make, Lord, would it just be a response, a way to say that we love you back,
Yes, God.
and a way to make your love, Lord, something that is really available to people in the world so they can know who you really are. We just want to be a part of that with you. We just want to be with you. And I pray that you would encourage the hearts of whoever's listening.
Yes, God.
To hang on to that and not get distracted or discouraged. I pray in your name, Jesus. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much, Matthew. I've definitely felt that hospitality from you this whole conversation.
It's so good to be with you. I really enjoyed it. Thanks a lot.
Yeah. All right, let me push button. Bye, you guys. Not you. I just ended